Connor Zilisch, one of the most anticipated hotshot drivers coming through the ranks, having already won the 24 Hours of Daytona and 12 Hours of Sebring in LMP2, second place in the 2025 NASCAR Xfinity Series, and winning Rookie of the Year in said season. The 19-year-old was expected to come into the Cup Series, and while he would have had some rough patches, especially considering he would have been a rookie, the only rookie as well in the 2026 Cup Series, he was still expected to potentially contend for top 10s, top 15s, and even potentially wins, especially on road courses where his talent really shined. But this season has been anything but regular top 10s. Only one top 10 so far, and regularly in and around the 30th place with regular DNFs as well. What has happened to Connor Zilich's season, and how has it gone this badly? Is it bad luck? Is he being raced differently, more aggressively by drivers older than him who are looking at this upstart coming into the sport? Or, more importantly, and something that most detractors would be saying, is he just not good enough yet for the Cup Series? My name is Aryan, and you are watching Racing Insights. Now, before we get to the nitty-gritty regarding Connor Zilich's season, why it's gone so badly, how has it gone so badly, I want to give you guys my opinion on him as a driver first and foremost, and what I think about him so far. First and foremost, I genuinely believe he is, if not the best talent, he is at least one of the best talents we've seen come out of America. When I say America, I mean the United States of America. I'm not talking about Canada or Mexico, for example, there. But I genuinely think he is one of the best talents we've seen come out of the United States of America. You know, we have the likes of Colton Herta, Alexander Rossi, some of these drivers who have come to Europe, who are in Europe currently, who have performed well, don't get me wrong. But when I see Connor Zilisch, I see a great amount of talent, you know, especially seeing him at Daytona. That was where I first saw him, of course. You need to have a serious level of talent to have the management, the consistency. Of course, he would have had the support of his, you know, maybe more senior, more experienced teammates during that race as well, right? But at the same time, you still are in the car for stint on stint on stint. You're probably doing a double, maybe a triple stint, potentially at times. And so to have that level of consistency, that level of tire management and so on and so forth is really, really impressive, especially in a prototype car, right? So for me, he is one of the best young talents I had seen at the time. Of course, he then went on to do NASCAR, the Xfinity Series in 2025, where I genuinely was getting back into NASCAR because of him. I was also watching the Cup Series simultaneously. Otherwise, you know, most people, what they do is they would watch, you know, their driver in their specific series. But I was also watching the Cup Series because I knew that inevitably he was going to go on to be a part of that series. You know, I wanted to reintegrate myself back with the discipline because I had been away from NASCAR since the early 2010s. You know, I used to watch it a lot in the 2000s, and that's because my father would be watching it, so I'd, you know, sit down with him, not really understand much. I was like 4 or 5 at the time, but, you know, he'd be watching it, so I'd just jump in and watch it with him, right? And then in the 2010s, I sort of gave it up. I was watching, you know, Formula 1 primarily, then obviously got into endurance racing, and then I got myself back into NASCAR a little bit here and there because of sim racing. But Connor Zilisch is one of the big reasons why I got back into NASCAR so heavily, to the point where I'm watching maybe not every race due to time zones, but at least every other race I'm definitely catching live, and usually I'm watching all the races on full race replays because it's generally exciting for me to, you know, watch these races and see what's happening. So Connor Zilisch for me is that guy. I think he is a serious talent, and I genuinely think he's going to go far. I think he is going to win a lot of championships, be it in NASCAR or somewhere else. Now, I'm going to address that last point first and foremost. Is he just not good enough yet for the Cup Series? Now, first and foremost, I don't really believe that to be the case. I don't think he's bad for the Cup Series yet. I think he's good. I do think that there are cases where people have, or drivers I should say, who are great drivers in the lower categories of NASCAR, you know, the Truck Series or in the Xfinity, or now it's known as the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, right? You have the likes of Justin Allgaier, Elliott Sadler. These are just but a few names who have just done that, right? Who are really good in that series, but not in the Cup Series, right? I don't think Connor Zilisch is one of them. You know, you look at the road courses he's been a part of this season alone, you know, the likes of Sonoma, Watkins Glen, he's challenged for those races. Heck, you look at Dover, for example. He's been good on ovals as well. Obviously, Dover was a non-point scoring race, unfortunately, but he came 5th. He was challenging for the win until he got that penalty at the end. But he is still proving himself, We've seen him do extremely well at certain points. So I don't think it's a case in which he is a necessarily bad driver for the Cup Series at this moment in time. I think he's getting to grips with the series for sure. There's no doubt about it. But he's not immediately like just coming last consecutively because he's slow. That's not Connor Zilisch, in all honesty. That's not Connor Zilisch at all this season. He's coming when he's had bad races but not involved in incidents. He's come 17th, 18th, sometimes 20th, 21st. And that's because of another reason which we'll come on to later on in this video. But I genuinely believe that he is not a bad driver or he's not good enough for the Cup Series. I don't believe that. I don't believe that whatsoever, in all honesty. Zilisch has the ability to put himself in positions to get the most out of what he is given. As, to be honest, and this is what I wanted to say earlier on, is that Trackhouse hasn't provided their drivers with a good car. They've not provided Zilisch, SVG, Chastain, they've not provided them the best car this season. All the drivers, if you look at it more predominantly, have been finishing in and around similar positions. If you look at Ross Chastain, he's 21st, I think, in the overall standings. And while they have had good races here and there, I mean, SVG is the prime example of this, especially on road courses. SVG is SVG. He's one of the greatest talents Motorsports has had, especially when you look at his career in supercars. So it's not a surprise he's come over to NASCAR, and even with a very mid car, he's able to perform so well on road courses, of course, right? We saw him win his first ever NASCAR race at a road course as well. So that is something to keep in mind, right? Now, the other thing I would also want to point out in regards to Zilisch, in regards to the whole he's not good enough yet, is that he's the only rookie driver, for one, right? And number two, the practice and time that drivers used to get back in the day is just no longer there. You look at it in any discipline, right? You look at it in Formula 1, NASCAR, sports cars, whatever it may be. It's rare for drivers to get the same level of practice and time that they used to once upon a time. And now, especially as well, the difference between the cars in Cup Series and the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series is massive. So it was always good. It was always going to be a difficult season for Zilisch. That was a little bit worrying. That I nearly got my throat stuck open there for some reason. But anyways, it was always going to be a difficult season for Zilisch. But I do not think Zilisch can be put in the category of drivers who are good in the lower categories immediately. It just doesn't make sense to me. He's shown that he's able to perform at intervals. Admittingly, yes, it's not consistent, but at intervals he's shown he's able to perform in the Cup Series. It's still too early, and honestly the probability of it happening already is low in my opinion. The next question I raised, of course, was that was he being raced differently? Are drivers racing him too hard? With the top drivers, especially the older generation of drivers, right? Looking at this young 19-year-old who's already won big things in his short career, are they looking at him as a threat to their own positions? Because while Zilisch obviously has an affiliation with Trackhouse, surely I'd imagine he'd jump to, at any given opportunity, to the likes of a stronger seat, one with the likes of potentially Hendrick, JGR, Joe Gibbs Racing, or Team Penske. And so, do these older drivers drive against him harder than they would against their other peers? Well, I do think in some cases that can happen, but I think that would happen mainly because it is NASCAR. NASCAR is generally a lot more aggressive. We know it can be more aggressive than other disciplines, and there have been a couple of fists thrown about a couple of times here and there. But in the case of Zilisch, looking at his races outside of Austin Hill, I haven't really seen any sort of terrorism committed against the kid at all in terms of on-track action. Yeah, sometimes it might be an incident of potential ramming from behind, in a pack or whatever it may be, but it's never really been, all-out assault, I am going to get him back, to be honest. I don't think that's been the case whatsoever. So now that brings us to the final one. The very first point I made, is it bad luck? And the title of this video as well. And to be honest, I think it has been the case. The guy has struggled a lot with bad luck this season. I mean, if you just look at a couple of races, right? We're going to go over the full list in a second, but you look at a couple of races recently, right? Chicagoland most recently, in the wall when Ryan Preece went 4 wide on lap 1, got sideswiped, and when Ryan Preece got sideswiped, and then he hit Zilisch on the way down, and unfortunately for Zilisch, he got the biggest brunt of it, and he was out of the race immediately on lap 1, just like that. Watkins Glen, challenging for the win. Bad luck with the caution towards the end, and then of course locked up a couple of times and got a puncture. It's just 2 races, for example, where that has happened. Now, I will say immediately, you might say that second one, not really bad luck, it's on him as well, and I'd agree with you. And that's why I have made a list of every race, almost every race. I think I missed 1 or 2. I think I missed Darlington and Texas, but Darlington and Texas, he was slow, to be quite honest. Still finished in okay-ish positions. I think it was around the top 20s, early, just outside the top 20, somewhere around there. But I've covered every other race, so let's go over it, right? So at the Clash, at the very first event, spun out by Ty Gibbs, and then he spun out himself. Finished 18th still, so not terrible in the grand scheme of things. First ever race, not bad. Daytona 500, caught in a big crash and then was taken to the wrong garage for repairs by wrecker, 33rd. Atlanta, big crash again, was rammed from behind, finished 30th. Coda finished 14th after being spun twice at the front of the field. Bad luck there. Phoenix finished 29th, was slow generally speaking, but then he suffered a brake rotor failure for his issues. Las Vegas, damaged by running into Stenhouse, who was obviously potentially, and this is what we all think, he was attempting to pit, finished 32nd. Martinsville, runaway tire hit door. Also got caught up in Baba racing against Hocevar and got some damage. Finished 26th. Bristol and Kansas 33rd and 29th. Slow. He just was slow there. Talladega caught up in the big one. Finished 26th. Charlotte wrecked himself by trying to avoid Austin Cindric spinning down track. Finished 39th. Nashville, brake rotor failure again. 38th. Michigan, double self-spin. 37th. Pocono, caught in big wreck, finished 23rd. San Diego, Austin Hill launched a terrorist attack, as per, finished 37th. Sonoma, finished 7th, his first top 10, great result, but stalled in the pit lane. Could have challenged for higher here. Now, to first get it out of the way, and of course I mentioned Watkins Glen earlier on. Now, to first get it out of the way, Michigan, Watkins Glen, and Sonoma all featured what in my opinion are rookie errors. The double self-spin at Michigan, in my opinion, I think is very much on Connor for sure. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I think it's also what would have been the most damaging to him. And I'll come on to that in a moment. In terms of Watkins Glen, the lockups obviously contributed to the puncture inevitably. So definitely, again, on him. And Sonoma stalling in the pit lane twice is also on him. But outside of that, I mean, if you look at everything else, it's just bad timing at bad places, in most cases, of course, right? You must be calling me out and saying, what about Bristol, Kansas, Texas, Darlington, some I didn't even mention. And while yes, he was slow, you go back to what I said at the start of this video, that's Trackhouse. The other drivers as well didn't do exceptionally well at those tracks. And you look at the likes of Ross Chastain, he's currently in 21st. SVG is so high in the standings is because of his road course wins. The other 2 drivers that Zilisch we're directly comparing to have just so much more experience that it's difficult for us to compare Zilisch to them. Now, unfortunately for Zilisch, like I said, he comes into this with little to no experience with this car, and he's been thrown into the deep end, right? And people are already writing him off. People forget that the likes of, the late Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin, who won in their rookie years, are outliers, and that not everyone can win in their first year, especially if you start off with a subpar team. You look at the likes of Joey Logano, for example, right? In the case of Zilisch, I will say this as well, is that he has been very good at picking himself back up after every race, right? Based just on his media comments and his social posts. And I really hope that doesn't dent his confidence. Michigan especially was concerning, double self-spins, it's not great to see usually, right? One spin can happen, especially if you're pushing your tires, and the tire management skill is still not there with Zilisch, in my personal opinion. I think that's what he struggles with the most at this moment in time. Again, it's that difference between in the Xfinity series or the O'Reilly Auto Parts series. I keep mixing the two up every single time because I keep forgetting the sponsors have changed. And of course, the Cup Series, the cars are too different, right? So he's still getting to grips with the tire management required for the Cup Series. But I do think he will get that going. But the likes of Michigan, for example, with the cell spin and everything, right? It's not great to see, and it can be damaging to the confidence, and it can show potentially also a lack of confidence. But you could argue and say that out of the multitude of races that we've had this season so far in NASCAR, right? I mean, we've gone through how many races right now? I need to double check quickly, but I think we've gone through a good amount of races. I think we've gone through about 17 races, give or take. No, we've gone through 19 races. We've gone through 19 races over halfway to the season, and only 3 real Zilisch errors. I'd say that's not too bad. I'd say that's not too bad at all. Of course, you could say 2 of those errors led to him losing out on some big opportunities for some big top 10s, and maybe that's what he needs to do. That is where I would say that maybe he needs to consider the idea of, reining it back a little bit, being a little bit more consistent at those times. And that, I think, is, again, going to come with experience and time. Obviously being 19 only, having the opportunity to potentially prove yourself against your more experienced teammate in SVG who he was racing against. You're obviously going to want to push, but he needs to rein it back a little bit in that sense. And like I said, the likes of Michigan and all were definitely concerning, but I do think he can come back from it very easily. And I think he will just need to keep his head down and use the season as a way to just gain experience at every given opportunity. From here on out as well, it's only ovals that are left to race on. So there's no reason to overshoot yourself at road courses or over push yourself at road courses, because there are no road courses. So this is the perfect opportunity. The last 17 races that we have in the season, right, I think is just an opportunity for Zilisch to just perform the best he can while keeping his head down, dropping in consistent performances. You look at the likes of Dover, for example, right? He's shown that he has the ability to win. He has shown he has the ability to perform as well on a no pressure race as well. Mind you, that was a no points finishes, right? So it's basically a no pressure race effectively for him, and he performed exceptionally well. So do I think he is the unluckiest driver this season out of all the disciplines I watch? I would say so, yes. To be honest, I would say so, yes, because generally, more often than not, every time he's ended up in a poor position, it's because it's not his fault. It's because of outside circumstances, right? And so for me, I would definitely put him down there. I've watched a lot of sports car racing this season, F1, NASCAR, so on and so forth. And generally, I could have probably thought about potentially the likes of Kevin Estre, who's not had a great season this year so far. And if you look at his performances in IMSA and sports cars, to be honest, you look at the Nürburgring performance and so on and so forth, it's not gone great for him as well. So I was thinking about Kevin Estre as well. But generally, looking at him as a rookie, looking at what's been happening to him week in, week out, I genuinely believe that Connor Zilisch has been struggling the most, to be honest, this season. Now, of course, while I'm recording this video, it's not happened yet. Maybe this video will come out by the time the next race happens, the Quaker State 400 at Echo Park. Fingers crossed it goes well, but you guys can come back to this video and let me know how it goes. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think Connor Zilisch has been the unluckiest racing driver this season across all disciplines you've watched? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.